Three masked men entered the bank, and everyone thought this was just an ordinary robbery. Customers hit the floor, cashiers raised their hands, the security guard dropped his weapon. But 78-year-old Frank Morrison, he just folded his newspaper and slowly stood up. The robbers laughed at him. 4 minutes later, they weren't laughing anymore. Welcome to True Veteran Stories, where tales of compassion and courage are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of First National Bank in Cedar Falls, Iowa. It was 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of quiet hour when the bank held its breath between the morning rush and the lunch crowd. Only a handful of customers moved through the marble-floored lobby, an elderly woman making a deposit, a young mother with a toddler, a businessman checking his phone, and in the far corner, Frank Morrison. Frank sat in the leather chair he'd claimed every Tuesday for the past 3 years, the same spot where his late wife Helen used to wait while he handled their banking. At 78, Frank looked like exactly what he was, a retired man in a cardigan, reading glasses perched on his nose, the morning paper spread carefully across his lap. His walking cane rested against the chair arm, and his weathered hands moved slowly as he turned each page. The bank employees knew him well. Martha, the head teller, always waved when he came in. The security guard, young Tommy Rodriguez, often chatted with Frank about baseball. To everyone at First National, Frank Morrison was just a harmless old-timer who liked to read his paper in their comfortable lobby. They had no idea who he really was. The front doors burst open with a crash that made everyone jump. 3 men in dark clothing and ski masks stormed in, their voices cutting through the quiet like blades. "Everyone on the ground, now!" The tallest one, clearly the leader, brandished a chrome pistol as he surveyed the lobby. "This is a robbery. Nobody moves. Nobody gets hurt." Chaos erupted in seconds. The young mother screamed and pulled her child close. The businessman dove behind a pillar. The elderly woman at the counter started sobbing as she sank to her knees. Martha's hands shot up instinctively, her face pale with terror. "Hands where I can see them!" shouted the second robber, a stocky man with nervous energy. "Everyone face down now!" Tommy, the security guard, slowly reached for his holster, but the third robber, lean and jittery, swung his weapon toward him immediately. "Don't even think about it, hero. Drop it and get down!" Tommy's shoulders sagged in defeat. He unholstered his service weapon, placed it carefully on the floor, and kicked it away before lying down spread eagle on the marble. The leader nodded approvingly as he surveyed his controlled environment. Customers and employees lay motionless on the cold floor, some trembling, others silently praying. The only sounds were muffled sobs and the leader's boots clicking against marble as he approached the teller counter. "Perfect," he muttered. "Nice and easy, just like—" The sound of rustling paper made him turn. In the far corner, Frank Morrison was still sitting in his chair. While everyone else had hit the ground in terror, the 78-year-old man was calmly folding his newspaper, creasing each edge with deliberate precision. His movements were unhurried, almost serene, as if the armed robbery happening 10 feet away was merely a minor interruption. The stocky robber noticed him first. "Hey, old man, I said get down!" Frank looked up from his paper, his pale blue eyes meeting the robber's gaze with unsettling calm. Then, instead of dropping to the floor, he placed the folded newspaper neatly beside his chair and slowly, deliberately, began to stand. The leader laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the marble walls. "Are you kidding me? Grandpa's going to be a hero?" The lean robber snickered. "Maybe his hearing aid's broken." Frank rose to his full height, which wasn't impressive by modern standards, maybe 5'9", but something about his posture made the room feel different. His back was straight, his shoulders squared, and his hands hung loose at his sides. No trembling, no fear, just quiet, patient stillness. "Sir," the leader called out mockingly, "I don't think you understand the situation here. We have guns. You have arthritis. Get down, now." Frank didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his cane forgotten beside the chair. "You boys might want to reconsider this," he said, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the silent bank. His Midwestern accent was unhurried, conversational. "There's still time to walk away." The 3 robbers exchanged glances, and all of them started laughing. "Listen to this guy," the stocky one wheezed. He's giving U.S. advice. What are you going to do, old man? The leader taunted. Bore us to death with stories about the good old days? Frank took another step, and something in his movement made Martha look up from her position on the floor. There was something different about the way he walked now. The slight shuffle was gone, replaced by something more purposeful, more controlled. I'm going to ask you one more time, Frank said, his voice still calm. Leave now. Take nothing. Hurt no one. Walk away. The leader's laughter died. You senile old fool. I should put you down right now. You could try, Frank replied evenly. And that's when Tommy, still lying face down on the floor, noticed something that made his blood run cold. He'd been talking to Frank Morrison every Tuesday for 3 years, but he'd never really looked at him. Now, from this angle, he could see what had always been hidden beneath the cardigan and casual clothes. The old man's hands weren't just weathered, they were scarred. Deep, deliberate scars across the knuckles. His stance wasn't just straight, it was military. And the way he was assessing the room, cataloging exits and angles, Tommy's eyes widened as pieces fell into place. That slight hitch in Frank's walk wasn't from age, it was from an old injury. The way he always sat facing the door wasn't habit, it was training. And the quiet confidence in his voice wasn't stubbornness, it was experience. The leader raised his gun, pointing it directly at Frank's chest. Last chance, old man. Get down or get shot. Frank didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, just a small upturn at the corner of his mouth. Son, I've been shot at by professionals. You're not even close. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What? The leader's voice cracked slightly. Frank took another step forward, his movement so smooth and controlled that it looked almost casual. But Tommy could see what the robbers couldn't. The way Frank's weight shifted, the angle of his approach, the calculated distance he was maintaining. Frank Morrison, he said, as if introducing himself at a church social. Master Sergeant, United States Army Rangers, 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 in the Gulf, 32 years of service. The lean robber's gun hand started to shake. You're lying. 101st Airborne, Frank continued conversationally, still moving with that deceptive calm. Special operations. I've cleared buildings, neutralized hostiles, and protected civilians in situations that would make this look like a church picnic. The leader's bravado was cracking. Stay back, I'll shoot. No, Frank said simply, you won't. What happened next took exactly 4 seconds, but to everyone watching, it felt like slow motion. Frank suddenly wasn't where he had been. In one fluid movement, he stepped left, ducked low, and covered the remaining distance to the leader faster than should have been possible for a 78-year-old man. His left hand shot out and clamped down on the leader's wrist, twisting with surgical precision. The gun clattered to the floor. The leader screamed as his arm bent at an unnatural angle. The stocky robber swung his weapon toward Frank, but the old man was already moving. He spun the leader around like a dance partner, using him as a shield while his right hand struck out with devastating accuracy. The stocky robber doubled over, gasping for air. The lean robber, panicking, fired his gun into the ceiling. Plaster rained down as he tried to get a clear shot at Frank, but the old man was a ghost. There 1 second, gone the next. In the space of a heartbeat, Frank had disarmed all 3 men. The leader was on his knees, cradling his twisted wrist. The stocky robber was vomiting from the precise blow to his solar plexus. The lean robber found himself face down on the marble with Frank's knee pressed gently but firmly between his shoulder blades. Martha, Frank called out calmly, not even breathing hard. Would you mind calling the police? Tell them we have 3 gentlemen here who need to discuss their career choices. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone on the floor slowly raised their heads, staring in absolute disbelief at the mild-mannered old man who had just dismantled 3 armed robbers with the efficiency of someone half his age. Tommy was the first to speak, his voice filled with awe. Mr. Morrison, I had no idea. Frank straightened his cardigan and walked back to retrieve his cane. No reason you should, son. I've been retired a long time. As sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, Frank returned to his chair and picked up his newspaper. He unfolded it with the same careful precision as before, as if the last 4 minutes had been nothing more than a brief interruption to his reading. The young mother, still clutching her toddler, looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Frank glanced over his reading glasses and smiled, the same gentle smile he gave her every Tuesday. "Just glad everyone's safe, ma'am." When the police arrived, they found 3 subdued robbers sitting quietly under Frank's watchful eye, their weapons neatly stacked on the counter. The lead detective, Captain Sarah Mills, took one look at the scene and shook her head in amazement. "Mr. Morrison," she said with a knowing smile, "I should have guessed." "You know him?" Tommy asked, still trying to process what he'd witnessed. Captain Mills nodded. "Frank Morrison is a legend in law enforcement circles. After he retired from the Army, he spent 15 years training SWAT teams and hostage negotiators. He's the guy we called when situations went sideways." Frank looked up from his paper. "Ancient history, Sarah. How's your father doing? Still complaining about his golf game?" As the robbers were led away in handcuffs, the banking staff and customers slowly gathered around Frank's chair. They looked at him differently now, not just as the quiet old man who read his paper in the corner, but as someone who had spent his entire life standing between danger and innocent people. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Martha asked, her voice still shaky from the ordeal. Frank folded his paper again and stood, reaching for his cane. "Helen always said the best heroes are the ones you never notice until you need them." His eyes grew distant for a moment. "She was the real hero in our family, though. Put up with me for 43 years. The businessman who had hidden behind the pillar stepped forward, extending his hand. "I don't know how to thank you." Frank shook it firmly. "No thanks necessary. Just maybe keep an eye out for each other, you know? The world's got enough trouble without us adding to it." As Frank made his way toward the door, moving with that familiar slight shuffle, Tommy called out after him. "Mr. Morrison, will we see you next Tuesday?" Frank paused at the threshold and looked back with a twinkle in his eye. "Wouldn't miss it, son, though I might switch to a different chair. That one's getting a bit too exciting." The bank erupted in laughter, the kind of relieved, grateful laughter that comes after fear has been replaced by safety, after ordinary has been revealed as extraordinary. After Frank left, Martha found something on the floor beside his usual chair. It was a worn photograph that must have fallen from his wallet during the commotion. The picture showed a much younger Frank in military dress uniform, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "To my hero, love always, Helen." Martha carefully placed the photo in the bank's safe, knowing Frank would be back for it next Tuesday. Because that's what heroes do. They show up, they do what needs doing, and they come back the next week to read their paper in peace. The news crews arrived within hours. By evening, Frank Morrison's face was on every local channel, with reporters calling him the bank hero and Iowa's guardian angel. But Frank refused all interviews, politely declining each request with the same words, "I just did what anyone should do." What the reporters didn't know, what Frank never told them, was the real reason he'd been so calm during the robbery. It wasn't just his military training, though that had certainly helped. It was something deeper, something he carried with him every Tuesday when he sat in that chair. 2 years earlier, Helen Morrison had been in this same bank when her heart attack struck. She'd collapsed right there by the teller window, and it was the staff, Martha, Tommy, even the janitor, who had surrounded her with love and care in her final moments. They'd held her hand, called the ambulance, and stayed with Frank through the longest night of his life. The bank wasn't just a building to Frank. It was where his Helen had drawn her last breath, surrounded by people who treated her like family. These people, Martha with her worried smile, Tommy with his baseball stories, the customers who nodded politely each Tuesday, they were his family now. So when those 3 young men walked in with their guns and their threats, they weren't just robbing a bank. They were threatening his family. And Frank Morrison had spent 60 years making sure his family stayed safe. 3 days after the robbery, Frank received an unexpected visitor. A young man in his 20s, fidgeting nervously in the bank lobby, approached Frank's chair. "Mr. Morrison?" The young man's voice cracked. I'm Derek Walsh, the guy with the gun? The tall one? That was my brother." Frank looked up from his newspaper, his expression unreadable. The bank fell silent as nearby customers and staff listened. Derek's hands shook as he continued. Jake's been struggling since he got laid off. Got in with the wrong people, started using. I tried to help him, but he took a shaky breath. I just wanted to thank you. Thank me? Frank's eyebrows rose. For not killing him, Derek said simply. I know you could have. The police told me about your background, but you didn't. You just stopped him. Gave him a chance to think about what he was doing. Frank closed his newspaper and gestured to the empty chair beside him. Sit down, son. Derek hesitated, then sat. Up close, Frank could see the family resemblance, the same jawline, the same troubled eyes. Your brother made a mistake, Frank said quietly. A big one, but mistakes don't define a man unless he lets them. He's looking at 5 to 10 years. Good, Frank said firmly. Prison might be exactly what he needs. Time to think, time to clean up, time to figure out who he really wants to be. He paused. Question is, what are you going to do while he's gone? Derek looked confused. What do you mean? Well, someone's got to be there when he gets out. Someone's got to believe he can do better. That going to be you? Tears welled up in Derek's eyes. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Frank studied the young man for a long moment. You know what I see when I look at you? Derek shook his head. I see a man who came to a bank to face a stranger who could have killed his brother. Took guts to walk in here today. Frank's voice softened. That tells me you're stronger than you think. 6 months later, Derek Walsh started visiting Frank every other Tuesday. He'd bring coffee, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. Baseball, the weather, Derek's new job at the construction company, and sometimes, carefully, about Jake's progress in prison. Martha watched their friendship develop with amazement. You know, she told Frank one day, most people would want nothing to do with that family after what happened. Frank looked thoughtful. Helen used to say that the best way to stop a cycle of hurt is to replace it with a cycle of help. That boy's going to need an anchor when his brother gets out. Might as well be someone who's been there. The first anniversary of the robbery came and went quietly. Frank refused the bank's suggestion of a commemorative ceremony, but he did accept their gift, a small bronze nameplate for his chair that simply read, Frank's Corner. It was around this time that the letters started arriving. Word of Frank's story had spread beyond Cedar Falls, reaching veterans organizations, police departments, and military bases across the country. The letters came from active service members, retired officers, and civilians alike, all sharing their own stories of quiet heroism, of standing up when it mattered, of being ordinary people in extraordinary moments. Frank read every letter, and Helen's old writing desk in their home became a command center of sorts. He responded to each one personally, often sharing advice or simply offering encouragement. His responses were never long, but they always seemed to say exactly what the writer needed to hear. One letter particularly moved him. It came from a young Marine stationed in Afghanistan. Mr. Morrison, I saw your story online. I'm 19, been deployed for 3 months, and I'm scared every day. But knowing there are people like you back home, people who never stop being Marines even at 78, it helps. It helps me remember why we're here. Thank you for showing us how to carry honor even when no one's watching. Frank's response was shorter than usual, but carried the weight of decades. Son, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are. You're already showing more bravery than I did at your age. Come home safe, and remember, real strength isn't in how hard you can fight. It's in knowing when to fight at all. Semper Fi. 2 years after the robbery, Jake Walsh was released on parole. Derek brought him to the bank on a Tuesday, both men nervous and uncertain. Frank was in his usual spot, newspaper folded neatly beside him, as if he'd been waiting. Jake approached slowly, his head down. When he finally looked up, his eyes were clear for the first time in years, the haunted, desperate look replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. Mr. Morrison, Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. I owe you an apology, and my life. Frank studied the young man who had once pointed a gun at innocent people. Prison had changed him, not just physically, though he was leaner and more careful in his movements, but something deeper. The reckless arrogance was gone, replaced by the kind of humility that only comes from facing the consequences of your choices. You owe me nothing, Frank said finally. "But you might owe yourself a chance to do better." Jake nodded.
Tommy,
tears
now
streaming
head
down
of
his
security,
face.
approached him.
"I want to try.
Penny for your thoughts,
I don't know
Mr.
how,
Morrison?
but I want to try."
Frank smiled.
Frank
The
glanced
same
at
gentle
Derek, who
smile he'd been
nodded
giving
almost
for 7 years
imperceptibly.
of Tuesdays.
"Well," Frank said,
just
reaching
thinking
into his
about
jacket
Helen.
pocket and
She
pulling out
always
a
said the
business
best
card.
stories
"I
aren't
might
about
know
the
someone
heroes
who's
who
looking
save
for
the day.
reliable help.
They're about the
Construction work,
ordinary people
honest
who
pay
choose
for
to
honest
become
work.
heroes when the day
Interested?"
needs saving.
The card belonged
He
to
stood
Mike
up,
Hendricks,
retrieved
a
his cane,
contractor and
and
fellow
folded his
veteran who owed
newspaper with
Frank
the
more
same
favors
careful
than either man
precision
could
that had
count.
become his signature.
Frank had called in one
See
of
you
those
next
favors
Tuesday, Tommy.
without hesitation.
Wouldn't miss it,
Jake
Mr.
took the
Morrison,
card with
though I
trembling
still
hands.
think you should consider a
"Why?
different chair.
After what
You
I
know,
did,
somewhere
why would
less
you?"
exciting."
"Because,"
Frank chuckled
said,
as he headed toward the
standing
door.
and placing a gentle hand on
"Son,
Jake's shoulder.
at my age, a
"Someone
little
once gave
excitement
me a
now and
second
then
chance
keeps a
when I
man
didn't
young."
deserve it. Vietnam
As
was a
Frank
long
Morrison
time
walked
ago,
out of First
but I
National
still
Bank
remember
that
what
evening,
it felt like
the
to
sun
come
was
home to
setting
people
over
who
Cedar
saw the
Falls,
worst in
Iowa.
me instead of the
Tomorrow would
best.
bring new challenges,
Figured I might
new
try a different
opportunities to
approach.
choose between
3
looking
years
away
later,
and
Jake
stepping
Walsh
forward.
was Mike Hendricks' foreman.
But tonight,
He'd
an
married
old
a
soldier
teacher
could
named
rest
Sarah,
easy knowing that
bought a small
sometimes,
house 2
just
blocks from his
sometimes,
brother,
standing up
and
when everyone
volunteered
else
at a
stays
local
down
youth center
makes
on
all the
weekends,
difference in the
telling
world.
kids about the real cost
The
of
bronze
bad choices.
nameplate on his chair caught
On
the
the 5th
last rays of
anniversary of the
sunlight,
robbery, the bank
and if
held
you
a
looked
quiet
closely,
ceremony.
you might notice
Not
the
for
small
publicity or
addition someone had
recognition,
made below
but
his
as a
name:
family gathering.
teacher, protector,
Frank's corner
friend.
had become a meeting place for
Because
an
heroes,
unlikely collection
real
of
heroes,
people.
don't just
Bank
save the day.
employees,
They teach the rest of
customers,
us that we can
Derek
save
and
it
Jake
too.
Walsh, police
In our
officers,
darkest moments,
veterans,
kindness
and
still
dozens of
finds a
others
way.
whose lives
Often
had
in the
been touched
quietest
by that
places,
Tuesday morning,
not everyone
when
who
an old
helps
man
wants
folded his
recognition.
newspaper
Some
and
just need to
stood
know
up.
that today, someone
Captain
is safe
Sarah
because they
Mills, now
stood
chief
up
of
when it
police,
mattered
gave a
most.
short
You may
speech
forget
about
the
how
story,
one person's
but if no
courage
one
can
retells
ripple
it,
through a
history
community
stays
in
silent
ways
forever.
they never imagined.
Subscribe to True Veteran Stories,
Martha,
where
now
justice
the
is
bank
honored,
president, talked
kindness
about how
is
Frank had
remembered,
taught them
and
all
no act
that
of
heroes
quiet
don't announce
heroism
themselves.
is ever lost.
They just show up when needed. But it was Jake Walsh who spoke the words that made everyone understand why they were really there. 5 years ago, I walked into this bank planning to steal money, he said, his voice steady and clear. Instead, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for, a chance to become someone worth being. Mr. Morrison didn't just stop a robbery that day. He saved 3 lives, mine, and the 2 innocent people I might have hurt if he hadn't been here. Frank, sitting in his corner chair, shifted uncomfortably at the attention. But when Jake finished speaking and the small crowd began to disperse, the old man remained seated, staring thoughtfully at the spot where it had all happened. Tommy, now head of security, approached him. "Penny for your thoughts, Mr. Morrison?" Frank smiled, the same gentle smile he'd been giving for 7 years of Tuesdays. "Just thinking about Helen. She always said the best stories aren't about the heroes who save the day. They're about the ordinary people who choose to become heroes when the day needs saving." He stood up, retrieved his cane, and folded his newspaper with the same careful precision that had become his signature. "See you next Tuesday, Tommy. Wouldn't miss it, Mr. Morrison, though I still think you should consider a different chair. You know, somewhere less exciting." Frank chuckled as he headed toward the door. "Son, at my age, a little excitement now and then keeps a man young." As Frank Morrison walked out of First National Bank that evening, the sun was setting over Cedar Falls, Iowa. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose between looking away and stepping forward. But tonight, an old soldier could rest easy knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, standing up when everyone else stays down makes all the difference in the world. The bronze nameplate on his chair caught the last rays of sunlight, and if you looked closely, you might notice the small addition someone had made below his name: teacher, protector, friend. Because heroes, real heroes, don't just save the day. They teach the rest of us that we can save it too. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places, not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone is safe because they stood up when it mattered most. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to True Veteran Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.